So, Pete Yanconi here at the Maryland Science Center, and I'm spending part of this morning engaged in an activity related to the coming spring equinox. There are many signs of spring. People use things like, sure, baseball teams heading for spring training, birds returning north on migration paths. People look for robins, people look for blossoms on forsythia plants, people look for the return of insects, all as signs of spring. And in fact, officially, there are other ways of measuring the return of spring. There's meteorological spring, and that's considered March 1st. March 1st has nothing special except for people who are looking at weather where they're judging the shift in temperatures, which sounds pretty reasonable. But there's also something called astronomical spring. And astronomical spring has to do with the fact that the Earth, as it travels around the sun, produces an apparent path of the sun. As the sun moves apparently north of the equator, that's the official start of spring astronomically. That particular date and time is called the equinox. There are two equinoxes, one for the spring called the vernal equinox and one for autumn called the autumnal equinox. And it happens that the equinox is a word that actually means equal night. That means that it's a day, one of the days of the two, where the daytime and the nighttime are equal. In a practical sense, the actual day where it's equal daylight and nighttime is a few days before the equinox, but that's all about apparent motion of the sun. A couple of other effects from the equinox. It's one day where the sun rises almost directly east and sets directly west. So if you're living in a city or a town where the streets are laid out in an east-west grid, if you look at sunrise, you'll see the sun showing up right at the end of the street toward the east, and later that day at sunset, it'll be setting directly on the opposite end of the street. So I'm busy here showing another sign of spring. According to folklore, as you're watching here, you're able to balance an egg on its end on the equinox. And that's something that I'm testing here because today is actually March 3rd. We're 17 days away from the equinox this year. Here in Baltimore, the equinox occurs on March 20th at 11:33 in the morning. And folklore says that at that time, that's the moment where you'll be able to balance an egg on its end. But here we are, more than 2 weeks before the equinox, and I'm balancing eggs on their end. And that one reason is because it turns out that eggs, even on a smooth tabletop like this, don't have a completely smooth surface. They actually have little bumps and extra bits of calcium on their shell, which kind of set them up as, well, an uneven shell surface on a smooth surface. That gives the shell almost like little feet to stand on. I'm going to try some other eggs. I've found that out of a dozen eggs, I can probably get 4, maybe even 5 of these eggs to stand up relatively easily. So here's another sign of spring. If you're watching people on videos debunking folklore by explaining that you can stand up eggs not just on the equinox but on any day, it must be close to springtime. And so yes, turns out folklore is correct. You can stand eggs on their end on the equinox, but you can also stand them on their end on any other day of the year as well. Takes some patience and some skill, or maybe a different egg. So happy spraying from the Maryland Science Center.